Today I'm making multicolor resin dice from the cap molds I made previously. I won't cover making the molds again, but I'll put a link in the upper right to that video. For these dice, I'm using KS Resin Liquid Art Clear Artist Epoxy Resin and Just Resin Epoxy Pigment Pastes. I'll mix separate resins in black, titanium white, violet, grape violet, and cosmic silver. I'll put a link to these materials below. I'm using about 150 milliliters of resin for this project, since I'm also making a coaster to match the dice. Since this is a two-part resin mixed by volume, I'm marking 75 and 150 milliliters on the mixing cup. While the two parts are measured by volume, I'm weighing the mixture so I can more easily divide it evenly among 5 mixing cups later. The resin, without the mixing cup, weighs about 175 grams, so my smaller cups will have about 35 grams of resin. I mix the resin for about 4 minutes, scraping the sides and the bottom of the mixing cup to ensure it's clear with no streaks. After 10 minutes in the vacuum pot, I pour approximately 30 grams into 5 mixing cups. Pouring and mixing the resin with pigments will likely introduce some air bubbles, but this might help some. I'm pouring only 30 grams because it's best to have a little extra rather than be a little short. I dip a popsicle stick into the pigment paste and stir it into the resin. For sub-pigments, like this cosmic silver, I use the other end of the stick to add more pigment without putting resin in the pigment paste. It's probably better to just use another stick to avoid the mess though. I create a mold assembly line and verify each mold doesn't have leftover resin from a previous batch of dice. If I find any, I use a piece of clear 3M packing tape to remove it. Starting with black, I put a small amount of resin in each mold with a popsicle stick to regulate the flow. This is messy. In retrospect, a pipette would have worked far better. I add the titanium white resin next. I'm trying not to pour directly into the mold center, and even pour along the lip since I don't want to stir the resin I'd previously put in. This is another place where a pipette would have helped. I add grape violet, violet, and cosmic silver one by one, including on the cap since this helps prevent air bubbles from being trapped in the numbers and causing voids, bubble holes on the surface of the die. I want a swirl effect rather than just blocks of color, so I gently stir the resin in each mold with a toothpick. I use a long-necked lighter to pop any surface bubbles. Yes, making dice is mostly about avoiding air bubbles. I put the caps on, wiggle them, and push very gently on them, enough to squeeze out some surface resin to avoid raised faces, but not enough to deform the mold. I don't want to create a vacuum inside, which later sucks air into the mold and causes a void. I make a coaster with the rest of the resin following the same style. Since this resin has a work time of 45 minutes and I've already used 40 of them, it's starting to get a little thick. Another pass with a lighter and into the pressure pot it all goes. I pressurized to 2.5 atmospheres and 24 hours later, it's time to see what I got. The coaster looks great, and I'm hopeful for the dice. Now I carefully remove resin from the outside of the mold and gently pull on the seams to get them to separate. A thin layer of resin between the top half and the bottom half of the mold is a good sign that I don't have voids or raised faces. Raised faces usually form when the heated resin expands and pushes the mold top up. This D6 is a blank, which can be used in shell molds. Blanks are about 2 mm smaller than standard dice. When you put a blank and resin in a standard mold, the blank comes out encased in a shell. This D4 is called an Infinity D4. It's much easier to pick up than standard D4s and aren't as painful on your feet. This D6 is one of my favorites. It has Redrin's backside logo on the 6 side and the campaign logo on the 1 side. Some of the dice are a bit dark, and I'll probably make sure that the lighter colors get a heavier dose in the molds next time. Last one. The D20 turned out great as well. The 20 is the D&D logo, Andy, and it's going to be painted gold in honor of the 50th anniversary of Dungeons & Dragons. Ooh, a 20. And here's the complete set. Thanks for watching, and I hope you learned something. If you have questions or suggestions, please put them in the comments.